Sorry, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, so good morning, panels, honorable audience member, and my beloved friends. I'm Shanin as the first speaker of the proposition theme, and as for POI, I would prefer you to unmute and disclaimer that the following arguments that I will deliver doesn't reflect my real belief and is strictly for the purpose of this debate today. So with that being said, I will begin my speech in three, two, one. So panels, today we firmly propose the motion this House believes that the rise of independent creator journalism brings more harm than good. And today's digital world, anyone who can with the camera and microphone and internet connection can become easily to become a journalist. Why? Well, this may sound empowering, but it also raises an important question: does we giving everyone a platform actually make our information ecosystem better, or does it make it more dangerous? And today our team believe on it. It's the latter. And also, before we presenting our case, let us first define this motion in this debate today. Independent creator journalism refers to news reporting and also political commentary produced by the individuals or small independent teams who mainly distribute their content through the platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, podcasts, and etc. etc. And instead of working under established news organization, or we can call like a legal or formal organization of news reporting. And also, our debate today is not about whether every independent creator is untalented, but we acknowledge that the same creator produced the valuable journalism. Instead, we argue that overall rise of this modern causes the more harm than good, and also because it weakens the system that makes journalism trustworthy and accountable. And let's we move on to our world portrayal in our side. Today's million people consume news through the algorithm instead of the professional newsroom, and also content that is emotional, controversial, sensational speech much faster than content that is balanced and carefully verified by the legal institution. Examples like at the same time, independent creators often work without the editors, fact checker, and also legal terms or institutional oversight. And also, as their influence grows, audience increasingly rely on personalities rather than the journalistic institution, making misinformation and also bias much harder to detect. And also, let's we move on to our stance. For this reason, we firmly stand on the and the proposition side. We believe that although the independent creator journalism has the certain benefits, and also its rapid growth ultimately brings more harm than good because it undermines credibility and also increases misinformation and weaken the public trust in journalism. And for this reason, we on our side we have a mechanism to protect this motion. We are not fully banning or removing the existence to independent creators, but we only see the very real harm that it brings and do preventive measures by creating the moderation for the news or the content produced by those independent journalists, and also making sure that harmful misinformation does not get the public and the useful information once do. And also for this reason, we have one arguments that I will bring to this occasion. The first thing is independent creators of journalism have the potential to increase misinformation and fastly spread the hoax. Why we can say it like that? Because unlike the traditional news organization, most of the independent creators do not have editors, fact checker, or editorial policies that verify the information before the publication, like what I have said before in the first speech. And also because their income depends on the views, engagement, and subscription, they are often rewarded for the posting quickly or creating emotionally engaging content instead of thoroughly verify the reporting. And this creates strongly incentive to publish incomplete, misleading, or even false information, judges. And we have repeatedly seen false political claims and also manipulated clips and misleading narratives spread rapidly across social media, and they used to like YouTube and TikTok, etc. And also nowadays there's an artificial intelligence, or we can call it AI, that probably usually misused to importance that only one person. Even when creators later issues correction or maybe there are clarification about their content, the original misinformation often reach millions of people at the first place. And while the correction receives far less attention, therefore the rise of independent creators journalism makes the misinformation more common and more difficult to control, judges, and creating serious harm to public understanding. And because of that it could weaken the public trust and also accountability itself. And panels, this debate is not about silencing the independent voices like independent rights journalism, and it's about recognizing that journalism carries its responsibility because it shapes how the society understand the truth, and also without the mechanism that we are provide at the first place in our side, we cannot run this motion well. And for this reason, we proudly to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Calling first opposition. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Wait, sorry. For UI preference, just unmute your mic because I will not be checking the chat. Please do it in transitions. And Kak mau cek ini USDC kan, Kak?
Yep. It's
Okay. Kalau itu, this doesn't reflect my personal beliefs. Pronoun she, her. Starting my speech in 3, 2. I feel like in times like this, when you have stakeholders within BBC, CNN, etc., it just affects how people believe in the news itself because they have the legitimacy and they have the capability to influence how people think when the rise doesn't exist. This is why the rise is just something that is really good. So proud to oppose. Few layers of setup here. Let's just start with firstly on the rise of independent journalism and how it looks like. This looks like we tell you that this is not something that is sporadic. That's to say that you still get check and balance from people. People are still rational and they can still figure out which ones are buzzers. They can know which ones are just exaggerating or it's just not legit news because just people have they have common knowledge and it's just not going to be that extreme to an extent that it's just going to be full misinformation, right? But also B, we also tell you that when there's a rise, it means that all other independent creators are also trying to make these kinds of things, which means that there's going to be check and balance from competition. That is to say that people would probably prefer the independent creators that have more quality other than the other independent creators that have less quality than the other independent creator. You just have competition that gives check and balance. But also see, we tell you that even in the rise, I feel like they still do not outweigh the legitimacy of news anchors that exist in status quo. For example, BBC, when you just compare a regular person with the BBC, of course they trust the BBC more. They have better legitimacy, they have more sources, which means that this also directly responds to their side on misinformation. Simply because you still have legit news under our side, this doesn't outweigh it. This just means that you have more viral things that get to counterbalance the news. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will outweigh CNN, BBC whatsoever. But also, lastly, we tell you that it also looks like people that are going to try to opt into making these kinds of news like independent news on TikTok, social media, is going to be something that is popularized by the people, which means that people are also going to engage within these. You have more people that are going to view these kinds of things and people giving out POVs, etc. You just gain more popularity on this. And then secondly, on independent creators, we tell you that it's usually not owned or paid by anyone, which means that it's not going to be like CNN where you have stakeholders. You just do this independently and you are the ones who own it. You don't have other people that are intervening your company itself. But also B, usually money either comes from you yourself or also donations, which means that donations that come from people who have the incentive to want to donate to actually like try to make a rise of transparent news, etc. Then lastly, the incentive of these independent creators are usually because they have passion for news itself, or just they want transparency, simply because when they opt into these kinds of markets, they know that they're not going to get as much profit as BBC or CNN. They're not going to outweigh them. That means that these people usually opt in just because they have this love for passion. They want to actually promote transparency, liberalism, etc. But also, lastly, on legit news or news anchors, this looks like the characterization here is that they usually have investors, stakeholders that usually influence how they act because they're really big news companies that usually have these kind of other stakeholders, investors, etc. But then also B, they're really heavily commercialized, which means that it's like you can see celebrity news in the morning, etc. They have this profit incentive. But then lastly, we just need to tell you that our burden here is just to tell you that the benefits outweighs the harms. Two arguments here. Firstly, on why independent creators are going to be more neutral, and secondly, on why you counterbalance the monopolies on just really big news anchors. Firstly, on why independent creators are more neutral. Let's just two sub-layers here. First sub-layer on the fact of bias covering. We tell you that there's an urgency under status quo that cable companies are usually biased. Why? Because they're usually bought to stakeholders or investors that get to influence their decisions on what they do. For example, Fox News is usually owned by like some people who are just really powerful in the world, which means that Fox News are usually right-leaning, which means that they usually present news in a right-leaning way, and they make it seem like it's going to be better if you opt into right-leaning, etc. Which means that the comparative here under our side is that when you have independent creator journalism, they usually are independent, which means that they do not have these kinds of stakeholders that get to actually influence how they have. They have the autonomy to just do or just to say out whatever they want without actual people trying to like lobby you or say that, hey, you need to promote right-leaning or you need to be left-leaning, etc. You just promote it in a perspective of a normal citizen. Why is this good? The impact here is simple. It impacts how people who consume these kinds of independent creators, how they perceive life itself, how they actually behave, or how they perceive politics in itself, which means that this could also impact to elections or how they believe which one is good and which one is bad itself, because now you have less biased people. But then also secondly, it also the second sub-layer is about presenting news. That is to say that even if both BBC and independent creators are like discussing the same topics, we tell you that when they have stakeholders, they are usually going to like present these kinds of news in a different way. Like even if the contents are the same, it had a few like one word in a headline creates a huge difference. People like BBC or other big news anchors can just make headlines that try to lean to certain sites, etc. Which even if the news is the same, the way they present it is going to make a big subliminal impact towards the consumers who actually see this, which means that it also makes people more biased in seeing the news itself. The comparative here is that when it doesn't happen under our side in presenting, etc., it also impacts, that is to say that when there's a rise, it also helps people break out of echo chambers on ideology, because the rise also helps people within echo chambers to actually notice that it's not all just biased, there's just more a neutral perspective itself, right? But also second argument on why you counterbalance monopolies. We tell you that in status quo, there's a big urgency that news anchors are just controlling the media. Why? Because they have investors, they have capital, they have programmers, and they have other people who just get to help them become better and become a bigger monopoly. But also secondly, this means that there's just a big monopoly on like these kinds of news anchors. For example, when you think of news anchors, you usually only think of BBC, you only think of CNN, because most likely they're the ones who are already the original, they're the OGs that already have immense capital, and they're the ones that you think of firstly in mind, right? Which means that when these kinds of BBC or CNNs become the big monopolies, there's no counterbalance for them, which means that they can do whatever they want because there's not much competition out there that's going to counterbalance their weight, which means that they just have more freedom to actually promote whatever they want without actual like counterbalance. This is where opposition comes in. When the comparative here is that when there's a rise, there's going to be more competition. That is to say that you have more independent creator journalisms that are there to counter BBC or CNN, which means that it's going to be less of monopoly, because these trends are going to eventually push to the algorithms of like conservative people or just like people who just watch these kinds of news anchors daily, because now you just get less of an echo chamber, right? Simply because you just get to actually consume news from independent creator journalism. But also secondly, we also tell you that you also don't really have no counter on BBC or CNN under their side, because firstly, you get less accessibility on capital under their side, which means that small news anchors that try to actually get big is really struggling. But also secondly, people are usually already comfortable with certain news like Fox News, which means that they're just going to watch Fox News all the time. This is where the rise comes in place and helps you counterbalance these kinds of big monopolies, which means that at the very least, you under proposition, people have no choice but to believe these legitimate anchors. Under our side, you have better competitiveness, you have better counterbalance. Even if these kinds of curators don't outweigh the legitimacy of news anchors, it's still enough for people to question how the news anchors behave, or just to question the news anchors in general of the quality, etc. Given all the reasons, so proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Calling second government here.
Itu apa?
Okay, please give me some time to get my note and prepare myself. Thank you. All right, before I begin my speech, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Anya as the second speaker of the proposition. And if you have any POI, please just unmute yourself. And I'm really open to POIs, actually. I will take either like one or two. And again, before I begin my speech, I would like to state that the arguments that I deliver in today's debate does not reflect my personal beliefs and is strictly for the purpose of this debate today. All right, with that being said, now I will actually begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. All right, first of all, we would like to thank the opposition team for their compelling perspective. From a glance, perhaps their arguments might sound profound, compelling, and relevant even. However, panels, despite this, their argument still leaves us with many holes and unanswered questions. First of all, how exactly will their side protect the people? Our side already explains on the mechanism that my first speaker said before, that we will have like moderation to protect the people from harmful content that truly does exist from their side. However, their side really fails to show on how they will protect their people from the harm that will exist and like for the real impacts that will actually happen. So clearly their side of the house not only failed to show the urgency and importance of their arguments, they also fail to understand on how the real harms already exist anyway, so therefore there should be actions or preventative measures taken to prevent these harms from spreading even more, right? So panels, we think it's quite clear on why their arguments fail to stand in today's debate. Now moving on to my rebuts. First of all, I remember they mentioned something about how people are so rational and they can think for themselves, right? However, the reality is many harmful things have happened because of buzzers or these misinformation that exists on the internet. For example, there are a lot of anti-vaxxers that already exist in today's world because they believe in these harmful things. So we believe that their side is outright undermining the real damage that already exists. So therefore, their argument doesn't stand. And I'll even explain this more later in my arguments. So moving on to my second rebut. They said on how the incentive of independent content creators or creators of journalism are passion because they are more neutral and that they're more willing to give right information to the audience because this is their passion. This is what they want to do for their living. So, however, this feels like it's quite the naive belief, right? That all of them is just going to be doing it for passion and going to be more neutral because the reality is, panels, any news source can be manipulated. Anyone can lie to you. Anyone can be manipulative towards other people, regardless of the source and the people that give the information. So therefore, the preventative measures that our team have already mentioned before should still be used and should still be considered. However, they didn't even have the dignity. Sorry, did somebody say POI? No? Okay, I will continue then. They didn't even bother to reply to our mechanism. Instead, they focused so much more in their arguments. And so therefore, that means that they don't have any reply to our mechanism at all. Even if independent creators are more somewhat neutral to some degree, they still fail to add the preventative measures that our side of the house has already clearly given from the harm that will actually happen from these things. Because creators have anyway made these harms in the real world, and I will actually explain this later in my arguments. So therefore, their arguments doesn't stand. They also mentioned on how the legal journalism are going to be more neutral because they're going to say that oh they're going to say that how the oh sorry they said on how the independent journalism are going to be more neutral because they have like more passion and stuff like that they mentioned before. However, the legal ones are actually going to be the more neutral ones. Why? I'll explain the panels. Because they risk on having their name getting ruined, and therefore they have a name to uphold, right? They have something that they need to uphold. So therefore, they have much more risk to themselves if they were to actually be unneutral and revoke to one side. They also act up as if they bring over and over and over about the legal stuff. However, we have clearly stated that we are not going to ban these independent journalists. We still allow them to exist. However, we are just adding moderation to them. So therefore, the independent journalism still exists in our world. However, we are not denying how the independent journalists are going to be much more riskful and create more harm. We are just saying that they create more harm, not that they should be completely eradicated, right? So therefore, that is all of my rebuttals, and I will move to my arguments. All right, so panels, we are debating on the motion on this House believes that the rise of independent creator journalism brings more harm than good. If you pay attention to the motion, you can clearly see how this does not completely ban the independent creator journalism. We are only saying that it does bring more harm than good. We are not saying that we should completely ban it and be like a tyrant. No, we only believe that this should have moderation because there are real harms and effects that will happen. So therefore, our side of the house has a huge advantage already from the beginning. Now I will get to my arguments. First, the huge impact of misinformation that exists. Like my first speaker has said before, misinformation will become a huge issue, right, with these independent creator journalism. For example, with posting issues and like report and etc. on the creator, right? And I will give you the reasons why. You're probably asking, why do they have much more issues with misinformation? Because, like I said before, any media can be manipulated, but even more so on these independent creators. Firstly, because they don't have any legal obligation to tell the truth. Unlike government issued news, they actually have a legal obligation to tell the truth or unharmful news to the people. So therefore, they actually have no real legal obligation to be truthful to the people. And second, they can easily twist the narrative to fit their needs and beliefs. Like, for example, my first speakers already said it before about the buzzer. They will make the situation more worse politically because if we read the info slide, we say how this is going to be impacting on the political side. So therefore, it's going to be much more harmful to the political situation. I will explain this much more further later in my extension of the arguments. But yes, the reality is independent journalism creators will definitely create more harm than good. And we're not saying they should be banned. Again, I'm trying to highlight that we're not saying they should be banned and gotten rid of. However, we just believe that there should be moderation to put into them. Imagine this, panels. You're looking for some news online and you click on the first one that you could find. And then you find more from these content journalisms that are irresponsible and cause these people to have developed harmful beliefs. For example, that I've already said before in my rebuttals, anti-vaxxers. And aside from that, there are also people who literally believe that the government is run by lizard people. These kind of beliefs are very harmful and clearly will affect the minds of these people, right? And many already exist today. This is not a distant reality, dystopian reality. There's no way people genuinely believe that in real life, but people do, and that's the reality. So therefore, like, for example, like I said before, anti-vaxxers, they literally refuse to let their child suffer and get vaccinated and letting their child, instead, trigger warning, die instead of getting vaccinated because they are so indoctrinated by their beliefs. Your side mentioned about how people are still able to think. However, these cases are real and they do exist. So therefore, that already cuts on your arguments. And there are already people online who spread hatred and hate speech against groups of people. One of the more recent one that happens, trigger warning. There are like literally many people who are called boti hunters who are hunting trans people all over Indonesia right now and hurting them just because of an online belief, right? So therefore, we are saying that the harm does exist and should be mitigated. And secondly, we're going to mention on the risk to teens and youth. Because panels, most of the people who watch these creators are often going to be online are young people, right? So this is a very huge risk because young people are impressionable. Imagine if these kind of contents just roam freely without any moderation for them all to see. What will happen to the young generation? We are already seeing an increase of violence due to the type of media that many people consume. So what your side of the house is, what our side of trying the house is trying to do, is to protect everyone, including these young people, which are going to be the future and the foundation of a nation. So therefore, that's already so much more urgency in our side of the house. So remember, my first speaker said before that we are not completely banning or blocking or removing these independent journalists from existing. We just agree to the fundamental truth that yes, it does have risk. It has more often than not bring more harm than good, which is exactly why we
Time's
need
up.
the moderation. Sorry?
Time's up.
Oh, all right. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay. A small reminder for everyone that the time limit is 8:20. Anything you say after that will not be written down. So yeah, please stop. All right. Calling second speaker of team opposition. You're here.
For POI preference, please just unmute because I will not be able to look at the chat during my speech in 3, 2, 1. Do you like tea? Maybe you like boba tea or green tea, but my favorite tea is equity. Okay, so first of all, let me begin with my rebuttals. You see, the prop team told you that, oh yeah, anti-vaxxers came because of these independent creator journalists, for which, for the sake of simplicity, I'll just call ICJ because it's a really long phrase. Anti-vaxxers existed before the rise of ICJ, before the rise of like social media as a whole, and like this anti-vaccination propaganda was actually perpetuated by Fox News, the formal news outlets that prop team is actually like defending in this case here. They're the one who first perpetuated the narrative that autism actually has a correlation to getting vaccinated. So I don't know what they're really talking about here because anti-vaxxers were totally from news outlets, but that also kind of contradicts their own point on how there's total credibility on news outlets on their side. And they also keep talking about the myth of credibility, even though we already explained how these ICJs naturally checks and balance each other. So actually, let's play on their best case here. Let's say, sure, maybe there's a good amount of misinformation within ICJ. However, how are you going to actually defend your case on how news anchors will still be politically biased? Like how they're going to, for example, depict Russia as invaders, but they're going to depict Israel invasion of Gaza as just annexing Gaza, which is a lot softer, right? Now, even in fact that these news outlets are credible, political bias is still very detrimental, right? Even at times, these news outlets will outright omit news. Like for one, if they're a really right-wing news outlet, as my first speaker said, they might not want to cover how Israel actually used white phosphorus, which is a war crime in Gaza, right? So political omission is really that bad, if not even worse than misinformation. So at our very worst case, it's symmetrical. At their best, at their worst case, then it's worse on their side, because of course political bias will actually lead to an even worse bias of different types of stereotypes and opinions. And I also don't remember anything legal in our case. We never said anything about the legality of things, but since they want to go that direction, sure, let's go that direction. There's no legal obligation for the truth within news outlets or within ICJs on either side. There is no form of legislation which mandates a news outlet or an independent creator to actually give a certain amount of truth or credibility in what they say. Why? Because people lie all the time. You know, the legislature will not be able to always mandate that. There's only one way in which legality can actually ever manifest, and that's through a lawsuit. On the grounds of what? Seditious libel. Seditious libel, you can sue anyone for seditious libel. Not only news outlets, you can sue ICJs as well. So I don't see how this is exclusive on their side. Moving on to my points. First of all, why is this rise actually so important? Why? Because it makes news as a whole more popular. Because first, let's look at the platforms of formal journalism versus independent creator journalism, right? Now, the ICJ actually rose because social media rose first. Now, because social media rose first, this gave them their popular platform. This gave them their voice where, you know, their voice is heard and people are actually listening to them. That's how they rose in the first place. Meanwhile, the formal news relies heavily on their own TV channel, on their own website, on their own articles. And sure, they have a social media account, but let's actually be so for real here. They wouldn't have that social media account if in the first place, independent creator journalism didn't rise in social media and they didn't see it as lucrative to actually go into the area of social media, because like then they wouldn't do that in the first place, right? So let's just put there that they saw these creators becoming popular, then opt into using social media. So let's establish that without the rise of ICJ in the first place, this kind of news as a whole, journalism, would play a smaller role in our lives. Now, why is it important that they play a bigger role? I'll explain later. Now, even if this rise doesn't exist, right, the formal news wouldn't play any bigger roles in our lives anyways. It's not like just because, you know, this ICJ didn't rise that suddenly the news would actually play a bigger role in our lives, because I feel like even as a person, before the rise of social media, before the rise of ICJ, I didn't outright opt into reading articles on the website of CNN. And I know that there's people out there that opt into doing that, but I feel like the vast majority of people nowadays who actually opted into listening to ICJ didn't originally opt into going onto TV channels and going onto websites to actually read from the formal news. So people are more politically active on our side, leads to better voting mindset in elections, for one. And as my first speaker said, like, formal journalism is still going to have their legitimacy, they're still going to have their credibility, but what are they not going to have? Their popularity. News will not have the same popularity as they would if we had ICJ. So what does that mean? People are less politically aware, right? They get less information. Now let's talk about the inherent difference between the two. Now, the competition-wise is different as well. First of all, formal journalism is a competition of spending capital, because notice that they're heavily contingent on shareholders, on their stakeholders. Meanwhile, ICJ is often funded either independently or through proceeds from the work itself, right, from donations. But generally then, these creators can't actually compete based on money. They can't compete based on capital, because most of their competition is
on these platforms like Substack, like social media, which isn't very contingent on how much capital you have. Meanwhile, it's more on the content that you actually give. So they actually compete against each other and acts as a constant checks and balance to formal journalism itself to be very precise and be very neutral and not biased, because it's also sort of a culture within ICJ to actually call out other creators or call out news outlets for being biased or inaccurate, right? So that's our forms of checks and balance, which so far, like, I feel like prop team has just been like ignoring that and neglecting that totally because they know it's true. They know it's correct. Now, how does that actually manifest? These ICJ can call out biased news anchors and in turn have more people opt into them versus like the actual ICJ, right? And also there are actually exactly five media hegemons who own every major news outlet. 5. Do you think they can offer the same level of competition? Do you think they can offer the same level of like these sort of mandated quality as we have right now in the status quo due to ICJ? I don't think so, especially in the Department of Political Diversity, right? Now, let's also talk about how ICJ or formal journalism rises on their own. How do these news outlets become popular? How do these creators become popular, and why is that good? Now, without this rise, formal journalism, as I said, is just an issue of capital. How many ads you can buy in public, how many dominance of a market you can pay into, right? How many articles, how many creators you can actually buy to work for you and use their name, right? But with this rise of ICJ, we already know that it's a court of public opinion. It is social media or it's just media. What does that mean? People fully control who rises or doesn't, right? That means this rise is purely contingent on demand. It's whether or not people actually want to listen to you, whether or not people actually opt in to like not scrolling away from your content and listening to what you're trying to say, right? Now, they actually have, that means that people fully control this, who rises within ICJs because they have so many options of different creators, right? Because as we said, there's a rise. So there's a lot of creators going onto these platforms and actually becoming an independent creator of journalism, right? Now, if you have an issue of quality, if you have an issue of credibility in social media as an independent creator journalist, then you are done for. Why? Because people will not opt into you if you have a reputation of being uncredible, if you have a reputation of being biased, or have a reputation of being a buzzer. Why? Because these ICJ have such an intense competition that they will actively call out one another, will actively drag down each other's reputation, such that there's a really healthy competition and a really healthy checks and balance, so that credibility can at least be maximized on our side. Sure, we won't deny that there will be some instances of misinformation, but misinformation happens all the time anyway. That also happens in the media, as I told you earlier about Fox News, right? So either way, there's already a really healthy checks and balance to minimize that. So at your best case, your point is barely relevant. Now, let's also talk about like further the checks and balance that exist in the platforms where ICJ manifests as well, because like the amount of competition that exists means that as an ICJ, you're not the only option, right? If you are uncredible, if you're inaccurate, if you are biased, then people will simply opt out of it. That's why we know that the biggest ICJs we have now are at least somewhat credible. That's because they're popular, right? Because they actually had to be credible, otherwise they wouldn't be popular in the first place, right? And when it comes to news anchors, they can be politically biased. They can even be inaccurate at times if this wasn't a monopoly, because there's no incentive for them to be fully accurate, to be fully trustable. Now, comparatively, there's no counter for like political homogeneity on prop side. Meanwhile, organic political diversity happens on our side because of how demand and supply and demand happens. With that, I'm so proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Calling the third speaker of the government here.
Good morning, panels. Before I begin my speech, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Iga as the third speaker. I would like to state that the argument that I deliver today in this debate doesn't reflect my personal belief, that is strictly for the purpose of this debate. Well, panels, they said that people more be heard from independent journalism and over again defending the existence of the independent journalism. However, we have stated multiple times that independent journalists still exist in our side. So we don't see the pen that they trying to make, what they trying to defend. It will exist anyway in our side. You don't even interact with our mechanism, so we can conclude that you have no solution with the problem in today's debate. Thanos, First of all, let's talk about the main attack. They didn't agree about the master media, but you know that what master media has. They had editors, fact checkers, a legal department, and a firing mechanism. If a journalist at a real news agency lies, they get fired. But what happened if a YouTuber or a TikTok journalist lies? Nothing. They just got more views, comments, and more money from the algorithm. The opposition wants you to trust that solo creators who have zero accountability. The opposition team proudly stood here and said, "Oh, BBC and CNN have stakeholders, so they
POI.
always no, thank you. So they are always biased. Wait a minute. Do they think that independent creators survive alone? Let's talk about who the real stakeholders want. The independent creator also have stakeholders too, the algorithm and their subscribers. Mainstream media can be sued and their journalists can be fired for spreading fake news. They have accountability, but independent creators, they answer to no one. They are slapped to their audience. If they don't make angry, extremely biased content, they lose their views and their income. They are financially forced to be extreme. There is far more dangerous panels. We move to our first class today. So who is actually accountable to the public? The opposition team wants government to believe that being independent means being honest. But as my first speaker fundamentally established that true journalism requires a system of checks and balance. My first speaker proved to you that you just cannot let just one single person to be writer, the editor, and the publisher all at once. When an independent writer makes mistakes or spreads misinformation, there is no boss to stop them. They answer to absolutely no one. We win this clash because building on my first speaker case, we defend provisional accountability. We refuse a world when news is just whatever a YouTuber decides to say on a Tuesday morning without any fact checking. So the second clash is underground reality. What are the actual incentives on these creators? The opposition team thinks that these creators just want to spread the truth. But listen to what my second speaker has said. Independent creators survive on a Patreon and algorithm views. How do you get that? By making your audience angry and telling them exactly what they want to hear. A mainstream newspaper has to sell to everyone, so they have to stay somewhat in the middle. But an independent creator only needs to please their specific niche. If their audience hates a certain politician, the creator will only make extremely biased video about that politician to keep the subscription more flowing. By glorifying this system, the opposition just funding extreme echo chambers. We win this clash because of my second speaker said the financial model of this independent creator literally forces them to be biased. Finally, the last clash. What is the long term on our impact on our society? Panels, let's engage with their absolutely best case scenario. Even if they are viewed generally good independent journalists of their like the opposition has claimed, the government still win this debate by a landslide. Why? Because the systemic boomerang on our societies shared the reality. Both of my first and second speaker have warned you about this. What happens when everyone gets their news from their own favorite independent creators? Society completely fractures. If you watch a creator's A, you got one set of facts. But if you watch content creator of B, you just got completely different reality. When we lose established news organization, we lose a shared baseline of truth. We can't even debate issues anymore because we can't even agree what is real and what is fake. The opposition team might think that protecting the freedom of speech, but they're permanently destroying our society. We, as the government team, protect the integrity of information, and for that reason, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Calling third speaker team opposition here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay. Am I visible?
Yep, you're visible.
Okay. That's my speech. Thank you. 3, 2, 1. I just want to burden push and say like this is a retrospective motion. Not to say they don't have the fiat to create a mechanism. We don't think any of their moderation would work on this debate. Let's just go into the second thing. Even then, we say that news anchors or maybe like independent creators have a certain laws that is put against them. Do not be hoax, do not be buzzers. That's say you have lost that moderate to what extent will they provide misinformation. If it is not harmful, we say that the government is the person that will put laws or like manifest implement laws against these sorts of harmful creators. Thirdly, what does this like? I don't even get the second speaker speech. Like, what is the relevance of like bounty hunters? Like, they don't even market news where they should follow being bounty hunters. Like, there are literal news anchors. There are literal independent creator journalism who doesn't market harmful things. They just literally provide the news that, oh, bounty hunters exist. It works on both sides. Even in news anchors, we will still do that nonetheless. Lastly, let's talk about the clash. It is two things. Firstly, we see the level of bias. We are gonna prove that why is it going to be that harmful, and why accountability won't matter on the side of news anchors. Secondly, we're gonna prove to you why the rise is needed in order for them to battle monopolies. Before that, let's talk about bias then. Aside from passion, I just want to note a simple important thing. People don't like these independent creator journalists don't just get an audience and then ask them like what do they want to hear. Like it doesn't work like that. Usually, independent creator journalists provide their views first, provide their own perspective of view, which they market to the public, and then they get audience, and then they provide the same normal thing because they want to stand by their normal neutral view. I guess like they don't really change their views that much. Like maybe some people will do that, but then maybe some people will not also do that. We have checks and balances. We have a spectrum of people who will do different things. Let's talk about the clash, about biases. Gabby posed an important faction. Firstly, without the rise, it would be always the same biased news anchors that is easily going to be bought off. You just need to, like, for example, it is always BBC, it is always CNN, ABC News, like Fox News, and like Peacock. I don't know, man. Like these are types of news anchors that is always going to be monopolizing over the whole like market, the global market, for example. Or if you want Indonesia, you have RCTI, you have Kompas TV, Metro TV. It's always those three single news anchors that is monopolizing over the market, which means it is simple. It is easy for politicians to just buy them out. 3 out of the 4 mainstream news anchors is easily going to be bought off. You have 2 different politicians competing for the same news anchors. This is why paying them off is very easy, and having them to be biased on your side is very, very easy. Comparatively, you have to pay off a lot of independent journalists. Note, there is a rise, meaning that there is going to be future upcoming independent creator journalism that needs to be constantly bought off. We say this is going to be much harder for the politicians to buy off and lobby them. Secondly, also like on the difficulty of it being bought off is also different. Like news anchors are just generally lucrative. This is why it's easy to buy them off. They need money to sustain their employees. They need money to pay the wages of like employees. They need money to like pay the rent, for example. These are the types of things that is hard to make news anchors sustainable in the first place. This is why it is easy for investors to just come in and lobby all of these news anchors in order for them to make it biased towards like, oh, become Trump leaning or something. Like this is easy. Comparatively, when you have normal independent creator journalists who have passion, energy, and power, like these are the types of things that happen. These people want a transparent news. These people want to weigh between policies. These people want to weigh against like the quality of policies, which is easier compared to just like, oh, money, I want, I'm a sugar daddy lover. Like these are the types of things that happen with the news anchors. Let's talk about the independent rebels then. Firstly, we say that creator journalism, they say independent creator journalism want views. They want like they want to spread hoax in order for them to get views. I think it is just inherently hard for you to spread a believable hoax that people want to click onto. You probably give vague nuances when spreading this onto YouTube or TikTok. This makes it hard for people to believe, and also to what extent do they believe? I think this is very like vague coming from them. But then B, even if it happens when vague nuances get pushed out, it is unlikely that people will follow this blindly nonetheless. Gabby tells you there is checks and balances. There is competition coming from other news and other independent creator journalism who gives better nuances, who gives better facts compared to these fake hoax, right? But then also on rationality. What I'm going to tell you is simple. You probably Google these simple things. You Google whether or not LeBron is on Golden State Warriors on a hoax, other independent journalist creator just spreads out. You Google or not whether or not like Trump is invading Israel, because this is shocking for me, right? When something is shocking, you probably want other news anchors. You probably see BBC or something. Like there are still checks and balances coming from news anchors nonetheless. We say the rise is needed for the second flash. Lastly, I just want to link back. even if they're
POI?
thought of, we say like, wait, we say that from competition, people just care about quality more. You have more and wait, this is like really repetitive. Before that, sure.
Okay, so you mentioned before on how the government will be monopolizing over the market, right? That it's only going to be the same news channels, which is Metro, Compass, etc. But how can this be the case?
Second argument. Let's talk about the passion then. Look, what they told you is that not all of them have passion. I don't even know who spreads misinformation for the love of the game. It doesn't really happen like that. What we told you is that misinformation will be called out nonetheless, like Alicia told you. It means that they will condemn them and people don't have to watch them anymore. B, even if they still get the money, even if they still get the money from like clickbaits, they sell subscription, or they still have another alternative form of money, which is more sustainable compared to them. Compared to the it is more unlikely for you. It is just way deterring for you to join a news and become an independent journalist who has the chances of being condemned and who has the chances of being called out. It is unlikely for people to do that. Comparatively, if you just rely on subscriptions, if you rely on donations, if you rely on the amount of views you get for revenue and for profit, I think this is more likely for people to join and do those kind of things. Let's weigh. Look, on accountability, we don't think it really matters. News anchors won't matter insofar as it is the politicians that is lobbying for them. Insofar as it is the politicians that is investing on them. We don't think accountability coming from the government or any kind of government will care because they are literally the one that is buying them off. Secondly, they just have loopholes. Guys, they have professionals. They have loopholes that do this nonetheless. This is why they can go towards the legal laws or moderation that they have. News anchors isn't as neutral as you think. Let's talk about the second clash. Is the rise really needed? Without the rise, we say independent creator journalism is going to be not going to be that sporadic or like that rampant. Look, the accessibility is important. For a competition to be done, you not only need a building, you not only need new news anchors, you not only need 100 employees, for example, which is very, very expensive, but you also need to fight against the level of competition that BBC or CNN has. They constantly push out 2 or 3 videos each day. Like, this is hard for independent creator journalism or any kind of news anchors to be sustainable with, because the news anchors need new news anchors need to have subscription. They need to have a lot of views in order for them to be sustainable. And so far as people take comfort in Fox and CNN, we don't think the new news anchors will be sustainable. But then secondly, even if I'm sorry, this is going to be the second part. Why is this important? They can't take the stance that independent creator will be as popular as status quo, which means because like they don't have the competition, right? The comparative is simple. Firstly, independent creator journalism pushes out more content, which means it is more likely for them to push the algorithm to push the transparent news to neutral or even more conservative fans. This is why you give a more liberal point of view to break the echo chamber. Secondly, without the neutral news popping up, we don't think accountability coming from people will pop up at all, because they don't know what a liberal and a true meaning of news is. Without that, accountability from people won't be done at all. For all these reasons, oppose.
Okay, thank you for that very fine speech. Now, calling the opposition reply. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Do you like tea? Because my favorite tea is diversity. And that's what you get under our side, because we tell you that we've been promoting to you that diversity is something that you get under our side, because you don't just become stagnant by just blatantly believing in just CNN or BBC. You have other things that can counterbalance these kinds of monopolies under our side. And that's why the benefits just outweighs the harm of misinformation that they've posited. So let's just talk about a few call-outs here. Firstly, I just feel like they didn't engage at all on how we counter news anchors, etc. Like, we have already attacked them and put them in an offensive position. As to say that we told you that news anchors are just big monopolies. News anchors are just biased because they have stakeholders. Yet we heard no response from them whatsoever. Their response were highly repetitive. All they did in response was just saying that their only defense is but you get misinformation under your side. That's why all of the claims that you posited isn't true. And this is why like we don't get why that's just important. But also B, I feel like they also lack in process analysis. I don't understand why people will suddenly blatantly believe in misinformation of these independent creator journalism, etc. But then also, lastly, just like what Michael has said, this is just not a mechanism motion, which means that I don't get why what their point is on mechanism, etc. But then let's just talk about misinformation here, because this is like their main case and what they've been talking about this whole time. Let's just tell you that under this is just because they're just repetitive but we tell you that under their side, it's just going to be worse, because when you have a monopoly, misinformation is going to be worse under their side, simply because you have these kinds of big news like BBC, CNN, that do not have these kinds of much counterbalance. Here's the comparative that we put under our side. When we tell you that even if you get misinformation, we tell you a few things that just counters their claim. A, we already told you that people are rational. That is to say that an average Joe will not suddenly believe that Donald Trump is a lizard in disguise. That's just like, it's just positive over like common knowledge. But also secondly, we also tell you that there's competition within the rise. That is to say that you have other people within this rise too. That means that you don't only have this one person who just spreads misinformation. You have several people who counterbalances this, which means that there's a competition which consumers will probably only prefer the ones that have better you have better equality, etc. But then also C, we tell you that backlash is easier through independent creator journalism right now, because there's a rise, which means that it's going to be something that is trending, which means that you get bigger backlash now, which also relates to the last part. We tell you that exactly because there's a rise, there's going to be more awareness on false information that itself, simply because it's something that is going to be trending, which means that you get parents telling your kids that you should be careful because not all news outlets are true. This doesn't exist under their side, which means that, but then also lastly, we tell you that news anchors are still quite legitimate. That was literally in my setup. That there's no reason why these ICJs are suddenly just going to outweigh the legitimacy of actual news anchors in the first place, right? This is why their harms has been diminished. Now let's talk about the benefits now. We tell you that firstly, you get counterbalance on neutrality on CNN or news anchors. But why is this important? Simply because you get better political diversity, which means that we don't make people just mindlessly follow CNN or BBC, whatever they say. But when you have better political diversity on the internet, at least people can question whether they should actually follow or blatantly believe everything they see, or just suddenly question their political stance in and of itself. But then also secondly, we thought that we also raise awareness, because when you have a rise, you get better discussions, you get better engagements on politics. This is better than stagnancy, where echo chambers exist under their side. You get less echo chambers when you generate more discussions on the internet, etc. But also lastly, we also tell you that we also raise more awareness on misinformation, simply because ICJ still exists, just like what they said under their side, but it's worse under their side, because you'd have less awareness on misinformation. I used to say that probably when I was a kid, I would believe that like lizard people exist. But now that you have like ICJs that are rising right now, I have my parents that remind me that you shouldn't believe everything you see on the internet itself. That's why we just tell you that the benefits outweighs the harms. And lastly, even if all of their harms still exist, let's just weigh this. We tell you that political diversity in of itself is just better than their whole case on stagnancy, where you have to just blatantly believe on a single news outlet and have the monopoly to control whatever you want. Given all this above, oppose.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Calling government reply to close the debate. Here.
All right, thank you. So, panels, I will now stand before you as the reply speaker of the proposition. I will give a recap of my team arguments and their team arguments and exactly why our team should win today's debate. First of all, their side kept on defending ICJs and their existence so that the people won't mindlessly follow CNN, stuff like that, and that there would be no diversity, and then it would just be worse on our side. However, we have literally mentioned multiple times over and over that they will still in fact exist, so their arguments aren't even relevant to the definition we have made. It almost seems as if their team is confused and still uses the same arguments without our definition, without even thinking about our definition. So therefore, their arguments does not stand. They didn't even take any of our arguments or clashes, especially the one on my third speaker. They barely even discussed that at all, which means that our stance on arguments are impeccable and therefore very, very strong, right? Okay, now going to my team's arguments. First of all, the first speaker already mentioned how anyone with a camera, microphone, and internet connection can become easily a journalist. Unlike the traditional like news organizations, most of the independent creators do not have editors, fact-checking, or additional processes that verify the information before publication. And with that being said, it could weaken the public trust and accountability by their income depends on views, engagement, and subscription. So they're often rewarded for posting quickly to get more money and benefit. And before the other team, the opposition, said that, oh, it's because they're passionate. However, that is not always the case. They could always just want money, right? And people are greedy by nature. So a lot of people, this can actually cause harm. And for the second speaker, they already mentioned very, very important topics like the risk of misinformation, bias, and the risk to the young generation, and the mitigation of misinformation and negative impact on ICJs. Because let's face it, panels, that the negative impact will always exist. The harm does truly exist, and it is much more harm than that it is good. So therefore, mitigation or prevention action should be taken. And they didn't, like I said before, they didn't even bother to interact with this mechanism. So therefore, their arguments are therefore left not strong at all. So, and the third speaker, they already mentioned about who is actually accountable to the public, the incentive of the creator itself, and the long-term impact it will have on our society. This long-term impact is very important to note because it will make us so that we won't be able to know what is the truth and what is right or wrong, just like what just believe what we want to believe. So therefore, our side is already clearly better because we recognize the harm, we mitigate it, and create real preventative measures. We don't just ignore it and claim that, oh, people can still think for themselves. We recognize that not everyone has the same cognitive ability, so therefore we should be able to protect those people, right? Why should we willingly let these people suffer or believe in harmful stuff when we can already do preventative measures? And so, therefore, we are proud to propose, and our side of the House should win today's debate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that speech. That marks the end of the debate. Thank you, everyone. Since this is an open round, that will be an OA. Wait here in the breakout room for 10 minutes, and we'll be back here soon. Okay, for judges, kita ke breakout room di ECLIPS 7 ya.
Hey, are you guys still there? The ethnically homogeneous, ethnically diverse team? Are you guys still here?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, oh my gosh. I just wanted to say your speaking style is really amazing. Like, I really love you guys. Your English is so good. Love it.
Thank you.
All right.